with our discussion. So, Jonathan, how's life?
It's interesting weather here in the Northeast. I just actually came in from the outside, and all the forecasters who were saying it was going to be rain this morning and it not begin snowing until mid-afternoon are wrong, at least here for southwestern Connecticut, where the snow is clearly accumulating on back roads.
Yeah, no, it's definitely accumulated up in Westport, and I know from your lofty perch up in your skyscraper, it's harder to see, but it's definitely snowy all over. And the schools, Westport schools, finally did they released everybody. It's one of the interesting facts of living in the Northeast is that the school districts have this measurement issue, which is they have a certain number of school days that they need to get in, and I'm sure you remember this. And if they don't, so if they have even a partial day counts as a day
Yep.
from the state point of view.
They need
Uh,
180 school days and must conclude the school year prior to July 1.
yeah, so it's some pressure, no doubt, but it's awfully interesting. I think when you think about it, the world that we live in, where we have measurements of some degree that we're either commenting on or helping someone to get to or whatever, and then you think of government activities and the sort of things that the governments need to do. Measurement is awfully important, even if you're a word guy like me. Um,
Nice segue.
you like that? So, so
Yeah.
let's talk about the first topic. By the way, my name is Peter Propp. I'm the VP of Marketing here at the Stanford Innovation Center, and we're here with Jonathan Yarmus. He's an analyst. He's been focusing on the IT business and overall business trends for what, 30 plus years.
Yeah, you had to mention that number. 34 years.
34 years of telling us what's happening next.
I started when I was 3.
Uh, so when are we going to get maglev cars? Because that's really important to me.
No, well, there are already maglev trains in place,
Sure.
and that's going to be a fascinating technology. But don't get me going on what passes for high-speed rail here in the United States.
Right.
What a disgrace!
It's true. So we had something interesting happen a month ago when we did um, the Pardon My Disruption event at the Stanford Innovation Center and online with a hangout. We had two interesting things happen with technology. First, um, my team and I, we were running awfully fast, and we neglected to create a meetup group or a meetup event for this event somehow. And we just publicized it through our normal channels, through our newsletter and our Facebook page and all that stuff. But we didn't use Meetup, and we had a handful of people show up, being slightly generous. And let's just focus on this part. This time we did use Meetup, which I think is a really powerful platform. We did use Meetup, and we had overflow. We had 25 plus people sign up. We had a waiting list of 10 plus, and of course the waiting list was able to flow in because everyone started canceling today, and then we decided to go electronic. So it really is interesting when you think about what's happening as a marketing professional, as someone who spends his time thinking about how to get people to do things that I need them to do. I think Meetup is possibly the most effective social network on a cost basis by far. I mean, we're spending right now some money with Facebook. We're getting really limited response in terms of our ad spend. I mean, our ad spend is sitting in a bucket because no one's clicking. And so it may not be the right community for us or the right outlet, but that's interesting. But Meetup is, I think the really possibly the most powerful social network, platform, out there in terms of getting self-selected groups of people to do something they want to do.
Well, I would say in many ways, not only not surprising, but one of the seminal books on the impact of technology. And I probably could Google it while we're talking, but Megatrends by John Nesbitt. And that's
Mhm.
probably going back to the mid-late 80s.
Right.
And one of Nesbitt's core themes in that book was high tech, high touch. And remember, he's now talking about the pre-internet era and talking about the impact of technology and how it can be this wonderfully connective thing, but also this wonderfully isolating thing. And his premise then was the more technology we apply to our lives, the more we need to apply the human touch.
Right.
And I think we're seeing all of these kinds of things manifest itself. So Meetup was a platform in many ways that was founded around that. Let's connect electronically to meet physically. The term tweet up, goes back to probably 2007, 2008, where you started meeting people on Twitter, and it's like, okay, why don't we actually put faces to these random avatars and streams of 140 characters? And it actually builds much stronger connections. And I think this is something, especially if we look at this notion of digital immigrants versus digital natives. Our kids aren't necessarily the big meetup generation. They handle the online offline situation a little differently. But for those of us who are digital immigrants, who have layered on the technology to a fundamentally offline structure, the ability to build these communities is a powerful thing. And I know, a shocking amount of my professional interactions these days take place because of meetups. So there's the granddaddy of the meetups, the New York Tech meetup. Getting tickets to the New York Tech meetup is harder to get than tickets to a Springsteen's concert.
Right.
The typical thing, they release them in 3 tranches. They've got a big auditorium, 700 people on the NYU campus in New York, and they release them 100 like the day after the previous event, and then 300 at a time at later events. And you're sitting there in your browser and Meetup clicking refresh, 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 so that when the ticket availability goes live, you click yes, and in less than 10 minutes they're sold out.
Right. It's Meetup. I'm sure you know the history of Meetup. Actually started um, out of 9/11, that at after the horrible Trade Center calamity. It's probably one of the biggest events of most of our lives. All of a sudden, people in Manhattan were talking to each other and asking each other what they did and what they were about and who they knew. And all of a sudden, this guy who had felt pretty isolated in New York recognized that even in his neighborhood, there were people with similar interests. And so that's why he created the Meetup platform. Um, Now, you're right. The New York Tech Meetup is so powerful and so outstanding a way to communicate. It really is what they've done is remarkable, and it is a real show. And I always recommend that people go to it.
And
But
if
but
you're
I
in Stanford, go to the co-broadcast at the Innovation Center.
the simulcast is fun, and we've got some tricks up our sleeve. We're going to be doing to try to improve the numbers we get there. But it's we're bumping along, and we'll figure that out. But what I wanted to talk about, Jonathan, was compare Twitter Facebook, Google Plus, and Meetup in terms of, ROI as a marketer right now. I mean, maybe, and add in, Google, AdWords is probably the most easy ROI to calculate in our industry. Facebook and Meetup is a real bargain.
Yeah, and some of it, well, I think the issue has always been, and this is an interesting way to think about things, is kind of proximity to the transaction. And that's why Google Keywords is so beautiful, because the person who's typed something into that Google search bar is in effect saying, I want to find out about X.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're an advertiser, you've now just been invited in, and you've got to assess your relevance because you're going to pay to appear in front of that person. So the person who's asking for X, is it really worth it for me to present my information to them? I better understand their context, because if I'm paying for it, I want to make sure that it's something relevant so they may actually click through and I can lead them to my path. So that's why Google is so wonderful, and also why Facebook is so terrible. Because it's, think of Facebook. What do we go there for? We go there to share social information. The analogy is to a cocktail party.
Right.
We had one at the Innovation Center last night. If sponsors had been walking around the cocktail party going, while you're here, are you interested in X?
Right.
What a terrible experience.
Right.
So the fact Facebook's got all of this information about us, and I think there are ways they can monetize it. But the challenge for them is it's not on Facebook.com, unfortunately, because we go there. This is our virtual water cooler. People don't want to be advertised to there, and it's very non-contextual. Meetup is great like that. People are going there because they want to share an interest affinity.
Hey,
and
I just figured it out. I just figured out how Facebook could make some money. They
Quick,
if you're listening,
file your patent application before you give it away.
No, it's fine. So they actually have a very strong forum platform at which they're trying to get out. And I saw Esquire.com, so it must be all the Hearst magazines, or many of them, are leveraging a forum. And so it's clearly Facebook, and you clearly sign in with your Facebook thing. And it's no sign in at all, and that's one of the beauties of Facebook, is you click it and the cookie follows you, and you're done, right? So they could, as a term of that, be able to show advertising content that they could sell. Maybe that could be ad inventory that Facebook could sell, even if it's someone else's forum, and that could be targeted based on the demo.
Therein lies the challenge/opportunity. If you actually read Facebook's S1 prior to going public, and very few people do, and I don't recommend it. It's terribly boring reading. But buried in there in the challenges, they basically identify their two biggest challenges are, Facebook Connect is a wonderful platform that enables this single logon, but unless people come to Facebook.com, Facebook's ability to monetize that not only is compromised, in effect now they are in competition with their partners who are saying, bring your Facebook experience to my site, and Facebook's saying, no, come back to my site because that's where I get the money. So the question is, and in my mind, not whether or not, but when does Facebook launch its own ad network where it can do exactly what you're talking about, where it can serve up ads on its partner sites based on the information that it's gathered throughout its network. And until they do that, they lose money when people have the Facebook experience on another site. So they need to get the ad network out there and demonstrate its effectiveness so they can monetize the off-Facebook traffic.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's gonna be very interesting to watch, and I wouldn't bet against them, but I certainly wouldn't want to be the person watching those dollars come in at a trickle.
Yeah, and hence Google's opportunity. I mean, we're doing this on a Google Plus Hangout, and Google Plus when it was launched, replaced another Google attempt to have a social network, if
Oh,
you
Google
remember
Buzz.
Buzz. Yeah.
Google, yeah.
And Google Plus certainly isn't what it was launched as, but Google's starting to figure out this kind of notion that says, okay, if I take my information and network across a various set of capabilities, whether it's video chatting and applications and so on and so on and so on, that I can have a social network that doesn't have a social network website quite the same way Facebook does. I mean, Facebook is defined by Facebook.com. Google Plus does not have to be defined by plus.google.com to build an effective and powerful and interesting social network. So I think they've learned, and that even while with the Google Plus site itself, they sort of try and compete with Facebook. At some level, they are trying to get faster to this ubiquitous Google connected information sharing, advertising supported network than Facebook, and they're off to a pretty good start with that.
Yeah, and of course Google has enough cash just to stick with it and to let the model, play out.
Although, when you say Google has enough cash to stick with it, that if I were going to fault Google for one thing, it's they stick with nothing. If you don't get traction very quickly, you get shot. More importantly, the culture at Google. I mean, if you're the hot programmer, you launch something into the network and you are already off to the next project.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine, what does that say for your career opportunities if somebody says, okay, we launched Google Plus a year ago. Hey, you programmer, we want you now to work on the Google Plus project. Whoever gets assigned to the Google Plus project today is wearing that, big loser sign on their forehead around the halls of Google. They've got a relentless new thing culture, and until and unless challenged, they let things, die on the vine, and it's, I guess it's a terrible nature of competition. We could say the same thing about Microsoft over the years. The only time they innovated was when they were challenged, and I'll give Microsoft credit at the very least for certain core things. Boy, did they stick to it till they got it right. Google does not do that and does not devote the resources, even having launched something, to sustain it until and unless they're challenged.
Right, right. So let's move on to Dell. So this is an interesting story. It was described to me last night, by the way, as Microsoft taking over Dell.
Well, that was an interesting, to me, by far the most fascinating element of the strategy. Because why is Dell wanting to go private? Let's look at it that first way. And the truth of the matter is, here's a company that is perhaps the poster child of the post-PC era. They've got a PC business, and they tried to do the IBM thing, let's acquire services companies, but meanwhile they're stuck with this white elephant of a PC company. And if you're publicly traded, it's very hard to make radical shifts to your business. Wall Street doesn't like that. I mean, people ask, why didn't Microsoft compete more quickly in the cloud space and the online office alternatives? And the truth of the matter is, had they done so, imagine Steve Ballmer standing up and saying, today we are going to attack Microsoft Office. We are going to build this kick-ass cloud-based service that the truth of the matter is we have no idea how people are going to pay for it. It's going to kill our office revenues for the next 2 years, but it's important for us to do strategically for the success of the company. Before he finished the presentation, the stock would have been down 30%, 17 shareholder lawsuits would have been filed, and they would have had a reverse course on the strategy. So Dell needs radical surgery, and the only way they could do it in a market is to take the company private. So now you've got a company ready to go private, ready to do the radical surgery, and Microsoft is going, whoa, one of our two biggest partners, Dell, HP, is about to do things that may hasten their ability to evolve into a post-PC era.
Right.
And we, at the very least, need to understand what they're doing, maybe even have a voice at the table, or maybe even be able to influence what they do and how they do it. And if it costs us a $2 billion investment, well, that's chump change to us. So I think Microsoft bought a seat at the table to, at the very least, understand what Dell's thinking, and at the very most, hopefully influence Dell so that the impact to Microsoft is lessened. And and they had to do it in this way with a loan, because how do you explain that one to the partners? Okay, we license our software to everybody. It's bad enough we're competing with you, but we're now playing favorites among our OEMs. And
Right.
Microsoft, tried to ameliorate that issue, the way they've structured the deal. But the truth of the matter is, they've now got an inside track on one of their partners, and if you're some of the other people in the ecosystem who Microsoft's already competed with, this still isn't an easy pill to swallow.
No, it's really interesting. Just to step back, you made a comment about um, Dell sort of pulling back and recognizing that in order to really make some strategic shifts, that means you have to be able to think beyond just quarter to quarter, and you have to be able to get get the nattering nabobs of negativity out of your ear, right? Because you've worked for public companies, I've worked for public companies. It's not that much fun when the quarter's ending, and
Well,
there's a lot
it's a
of stress.
it's a double-edged sword, because there are wonderful things. As you know, I worked at Gartner from '87 to '97. When I went there, it was a publicly traded company. Post the '87 crash, went back private and went public again. And when it went public, we had a scorecard. We knew every day, hey, we're doing the right things for the business, because the stock price kept going up. And in an environment like that, it's great for recruiting, it's great for morale. When things are going well, that being public, we made money, all was good. But
Right.
there are times when the stock price isn't going up, the employees are wondering, you're having to answer to shareholders. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook is probably as close to a private public company as there is. Zuckerberg has all of these big controlling interests, and I'm sure if you got him in a private moment and attached him to a lie detector, he'd go, I am so sorry we went public. This sucks. Even with a controlling interest in the
Right.
company, I've got to
Well,
answer
I want
all
to.
of
I mean, I can tell you other stories. I mean, I worked for one of the largest public relations firms in the world in the '80s, and it was Hill and Knowlton. Public
you
relations
work there
firms,
too?
public relations firms should not be public. Okay, because in this one, you end up taking on some crazy clients, and what does a public relations firm have if not its reputation? Right? And similar for, you could say the same for law firms and others. What about these financial institutions that are now public? They didn't used to be. It was rare a decade ago for a big bank to be public, right? I
Well,
mean, we're adding so much risk into our system overall. I applaud Dell. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. By the way, the GM that I was privileged to get to work for when we were starting WebSphere is a guy named John Swainson, and he's now running software for Dell, or a big part of it. And he's not a guy that I would ever bet against. So I think that chances are Dell has been doing some real thinking, and I look forward to seeing what they do.
yeah, I agree. I think the public markets, and it's just been more so every day. It's not even quarter to quarter, it's day to day to day. The oversight you get, and with all of these activists, I'm watching the news today, and Apple's having to respond, to the guy who's basically come in and said, you got all this cash, you got no good use for it, how are you going to respond? And Apple took, which what for them, and probably under Steve Jobs would have been unthinkable, but they actually issued a press release saying, yeah, we're thinking about what to do with the cash and considering distributing it to investors.
Hmm.
And in a publicly traded activist kind of world, that's something that's important. Where from Apple's perspective, the old Apple would have been, we'll always find a good use for that cash that will just better our business and make it happy for everybody. So
it is,
I mean, publicly traded is a double-edged sword.
yeah. Just on Apple for a second, because we love to talk about Apple. I mean, you think with all that cash they could figure out TV, for crying out loud. Why don't they? Why don't they? Someone said, I think it was Jason Calacanis on one of his podcasts. It's not original to me. It's a good idea. It would be for Apple to buy Dish TV or one of the other satellite providers, and to make that their entry into the set-top box business, because that way they could actually control the pipe in the experience.
Well, I interestingly enough, I actually blogged about Apple and what's next recently at drdisruptive.com. The problem they have with television and movies overall is everybody saw them coming. Ask the music labels, and Apple's been a distinctly double-edged sword, mostly negative for them, because they forced this change on the music industry, and in so doing, Apple, as they've done in a number of other segments, has wrung all the profit out of it, where Apple's the one making the money, and the labels and even the artists are having are challenged in a post-Apple economic world. The TV labels have had 10 years to see this one coming, and have had a number of other upstarts, whether you count Netflix, and we can go on and on with the people who have dabbled in that space. And so Apple's ability to go in and disrupt that space is much more constrained than the music space. You've got bigger, more powerful players who have had the opportunity to see Apple coming, with the net result being, and more importantly, when you say Apple TV, a lot of people these days are waiting for Apple to introduce a television. And I don't think that's the killer product. Reason number one, how old's the TV in your house, and how long do you expect to have it?
Right.
The average length of a life of a smartphone is 21 months. The average life, you buy a TV, and that's the one that's staying 5 years, 7 years,
Right.
Some large period. So Apple's opportunity to churn the base and keep selling products is constrained. I've hypothesized that what's the missing element? I sit here and I'm a technology weenie, and I've got smart TVs, I've got computers, I've got laptops, I've got tablets, I've got phones. When I walk in the house, the experience is just gruesome. It's a whole bunch of point solutions that there's no central hub. And we've been talking for years now, maybe that was going to be the game console. So was this Microsoft's entree into home automation? I think the opportunity to be the home entertainment controller, unifying all of your disparate resources, that home automation opportunity gets them into refrigerators down the road. The ex-Apple people who've launched the Nest thermostat.
Forget Apple TV. It's the Apple fridge.
Yeah, well, it's the Apple Home. That
Right.
I'm an Apple Home, and it's going to be the hub and interface for all of my intelligent devices. And the fridge will get there, but right now we've got TVs, we've got printers, we've got thermostats, we've got other environmentals, we've got home security. There are a whole bunch of things that right now are disparate point solutions that we would love to have a unified experience. And whenever you say the words unified experience or just the word experience, this is a space Apple can own. That it has all the hallmarks of a problem that Apple can solve. When they do it, everybody will be, wow, it's amazing that they invented this, even while there have been a whole bunch of companies who've been doing little things for 10 years. This is what, I think it's got all the hallmarks of something they can do that fits with their model, that's economically lucrative. And oh, by the way, like a lot of things, I think will surprise a lot of people. It's like, ooh, we didn't see that one coming. We didn't see the iPhone coming. We didn't see the iPad coming. Everybody, we see the television coming. I don't think that's going to be it. I
Right.
think
So
the surprise.
Michael Jablon, one of our members at the Innovation Center, asked. You talked about in Walter Isaacson's book that supposedly Jobs, before he died, said that he'd figured out Apple TV, or the TV. He had licked it. So do you think that he may have, but they've changed their mind, or do you think there's some big thing, or maybe it's what you're saying, it's the TV as part of the home automation platform?
And it may be that he may have, but that he might have figured out the technical architecture, and all that was left was negotiating with the studios. And he's got a pretty good bully pulpit to go negotiate with the studios. It's like, here's what you're going to do. One of you is going to cave, and the one that caves is going to be wildly successful. And oh, by the way, I've got Pixar, and I can influence the direction, and you want my films, and blah, blah, blah. And he had all sorts of bully pulpit negotiating things that maybe he could have done it. I'm not convinced, but maybe he could have done it. Tim Cook doesn't have the same approach, doesn't have the same clout, doesn't have the same bark. And I think it manifests itself that even if he thought he had the technical architecture for a smart set-top box, that it's important that you have the relationships with a whole bunch of content providers, or get them to cave like dominoes. And in his absence, I'm not convinced anyone's in a position to do what he did.
Right. All right. Let's shift over to IBM Connect. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this was the show formerly known as Lotusphere.
Ah.
Yes, and IBM is not so slowly killing off the Lotus brand, and so Connect is really fascinating show in many ways, because probably 80% of the people there, and it's somewhere round numbers 10,000 people down in Orlando in January. 8,000 of them are probably deeply techy Lotus Notes people, and some of the session titles, I'd read the session title and go, wow, does anybody still do that? And you'd peek in the room, and there'd be 150 people paying rapt attention. But the more interesting thing to me was the new IBM, if you will, that, and IBM is a company that I've watched professionally now for 26 years, and they're really a fascinating company, because the IBM I watched starting in 1987 made PCs, actually was trying to make PC operating systems, OS2, made mini computers, did some database software, and oh yeah, mainframes. And here we are 26 years later, and IBM does almost nothing that it did when I started watching them in 1987. And I contrast that with Microsoft, and we used to think of Microsoft, hard as it is to imagine today, as the upstart company. They were the one who really went after IBM and broke the IBM monopoly on the technology marketplace. So what was the Microsoft company I watched in 1987? The Microsoft company I watched in 1987 was a Windows and Office company. 26 years later, there's a Windows and Office company. So they've actually remained remarkably stagnant. And Connect was a vision of where IBM's going as a company. And it's embodied in this whole smarter enterprise, smarter world, smarter everything kind of thing.
Yep.
And what I think so brilliant about it is the evolution of technology. It used to be we technologists who were the ones who defined the technology in an organization. And now the business people are the ones defining it. And Microsoft had to get away from that. Oh, answer the phone, Peter. Microsoft had to get away from that CIO reliance. So they're in here pushing a vision that is very interesting and compelling to the rest of the C-suite. And I think they're in a fascinating transition period because they've got a message that's compelling at very high levels, but there are not a lot of CEOs who are ready to stand up and go, okay, I'm committed to a smarter enterprise. I'm committed to IBM as my partner, and we're going to buy all of this stuff top down IBM. IBM helped make us a smarter enterprise. So especially in this kind of groupware collaborative social space, if you actually just look at the products IBM has, if the company's name was other than IBM, everybody'd be saying this company has the most amazingly complete, robust,
Yep.
fabulous set of products. It's broader than anybody's portfolio. The individual components stand on their own merits. And IBM's big problem is people are deploying this stuff in a bottoms-up way, and IBM's best channel, even while they talk about partners, is still in a top-down way. So
Yeah,
this
so
is a company very much in transition.
yeah, so I spent 15 years there. I still bleed blue in many regards. And I know Alistair Rennie, who's the GM for the Lotus, I guess the brand that was Lotus or is Lotus still, and Mike Roden. I've spent time with a lot of the guys on that team, and it's a great bunch of people. We've talked in the past about the bring your own device phenomena, and it's bring your own chat platform phenomena as well, right? And I spent hours at IBM and was very productive using chat. We talked about this, in the early days of chat with some really great directory stuff, all sorts of stuff they were exposing, experimenting with, and we were, really getting a lot of squeezing a lot of productivity out of those things. So they've been doing it a long time, and the ideas behind Lotus are more powerful than the software. That's why the software, as it comes out, I think always has some really great logic. It's more than the software. I'm not saying it's less or more powerful, but it's more than. And it's a philosophy about connecting and about leveraging a community. But yeah, I mean, if you've got a new hire who's 24 and you tell them that the way they're going to communicate with their team is by using something from IBM, it's a tough sale. But you know what, the value will hopefully win out, and people will migrate eventually to the best tools.
But it's not just you tell a 24-year-old, because at some point they're going to use what they're going to use along with what you provide them. But it's more, even where's the purchasing decision? IBM for a long time made its home in the CIO's office. They would sell a mainframe there, and once a year they'd go back and resell it. And they're still most comfortable in close proximity to the CIO with big enterprise-wide contracts. They're doing a clearly very adept job of moving down into the enterprise, but at some level, it's not their sales model. They go through partners, and the partners are very much more localized, hit and miss. And oh, by the way, if you're a partner, you may well carry products from several people. The whole question of a freemium strategy, it was still a bit of an anathema to IBM, where a lot of these social platforms, you can get started for free. And you get 10 people using it, and now, wow, it works, and let's scale it. And we've now gamed the system, and we have 2 10-people groups. We've got it up to 20, but we're actually using it and not gaming the system. It's like, okay, well, I pay $10 a user a month to actually get the supported platform and scale it out. And so that guerrilla strategy based on the freemium model works very well in emergent markets. The question has been, and I've been going to the Enterprise 2.0 conference for years and years and years. And it's one of those things, you know me, I'm a big believer in the impact of social business. And for a long time, this conference has been the vendors of the various platforms talking to each other looking at the 3 customers who came to the show and said, buy our stuff, buy our stuff. And it's still a sell that enterprises are not convinced yet of the value. We began this conversation today with a talk about ROI, and we're all okay. How do we define the ROI of a social business? And we're just now starting to get those case studies. To use the Gartner parlance, we've gone out of that period of inflated expectations where, okay, this is going to transform your business overnight, make you more nimble, globally competitive, blah, blah, blah. And we've gone into the trough of disillusionment. And the trough of disillusionment is where it didn't meet those lofty expectations. This was a fad. It's never going to meet those lofty expectations. And therefore, why should I do this? Those of us who believe know that there's coming this day of enlightenment when we go, hey, this stuff actually does return benefit, and actually returns benefit in ways more than we even expected in those early frothy hyped up days. But we're not at that point yet, and that's IBM's challenge. That's the market's growth. We've got to learn how to be a social business. We both worked at Hill and Knowlton. We both worked at PR firms. We've both heard marketers go, well, the customer really owns the brand. And every time you heard a marketer said that, you knew they were lying. They believe they own the brand. No, we're in a world where, look at what happened. Who are the big winners at the Super Bowl? Among the winners were Audi, who, when the lights went out at the Mercedes-Benz Superdome, tweeted, hey, we can lend you some lights. Or Oreo, who tweeted the fact that, gee, our Oreos are great for dunking in the dark, and they had this black and white image of an Oreo being dunked in a shadowy environment that went viral. So these people understand the power of customers to carry the brand, and I think we're at a period where businesses are still wrestling with that. So we're still early, and naturally, a lot of them are sitting back and saying, I told you it wasn't going to happen that way, and are consoling themselves with they've got a few more years of owning the world before we have this radical social business transformation.
Yeah, I mean, the massive amount of startups that are getting funded and starting and bootstrapping around this space of trying to figure out how to go from a social interaction to revenue. I mean, it's like a silo, right? I mean, I'm not talking about like an industry silo. I'm talking about like, when you're driving out in the country and you see a real silo, that's what it feels like to me. It's that big. That if you just clip them out, and made a 1-inch by 5-inch name list of their URL and dropped it in the top of the silo, you would fill the silo. It's that many companies.
Yeah,
right?
but let's look at what's gone on here. We can all talk about Facebook's valuation and will they monetize it or whatever, but they got 1 billion users. 1 billion. I mean, this is just unbelievable scale. And you get 1 billion users on your platform, I'm betting you're going to be able to figure out how to make money. A lot of these startups, the way they get venture money, with nothing, they go out and get tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Our ability to assemble large audiences and do interesting things with them is unbelievable right now. And I think we start to take some of this stuff for granted. I mean, 10 years ago, if you told a small startup was going to be able to accumulate 100,000 users, you wouldn't believe something like that. Mature companies didn't get 100,000 users.
Right. Yeah, now it's billion is table stakes.
Yeah.
So let's just shift gears. Final topic, and if you guys do want to ask a question, please just tweet to at PPROPP. That's my Twitter handle, or at, are you Jay Yarmus?
That's correct.
At Jay Yarmus. We'll both monitor our tweets, or you can post on the Stanford Innovation Center Facebook page there's a little bit of a forum going there. Um, so your last topic was about the hacking job out of China against the New York Times and a bunch of other outlets as well, right? What's
Yeah,
going on?
but the Times one, particularly caught my attention. Uh, we've seen the discussions, and I haven't read an article. I think it's in the Atlantic, but there's some talking about basically that World War III is going to be fought over the internet,
Mm,
and that we're seeing just some of the early skirmishes in World War III. And it's one of those things, with a snowstorm coming and with the likelihood that some people are going to be losing electricity, we are once again reminded of the fragility of the infrastructure we've got going here. That
right.
if you tell me I don't have reliable access to the internet,
Hmm.
I do large amounts of my financial transactions over the internet. As a matter of fact, I do so much of it over the internet. The one bill I pay by paper is my water bill. And the reason why I pay my water bill by paper is the idiot water company actually charges me a premium if I do it online.
That's funny.
And to me, yeah, and funny, inexcusable, unjustifiable. I even wrote my congressman going, this is ridiculous and usurious, because the truth of the matter is the charge they're charging me to do it online actually amounts to about 15% of my water bill, and this is outrageous. But that's how reliant I am, that if they make me use a check, I'm extremely resentful and agitated.
Right.
What happens in a world where our passwords are being hacked? The sites where we share this information are being hacked.
Hmm.
And if we get to a point where we conclude that the internet as we know it today is a war ground, I mean, I imagine there are, if I told you were going to go, take a summer vacation to Syria, you'd go, no, there's a war going on there. I'm not going there because let me go somewhere safe. Well, if this becomes our war battleground, and I know I'm getting way philosophical, but one of my colleagues, Fred McClimans, is on the cast. I know he's sitting there going, "This is exactly what I want to talk about. This is my business." That the global implications of cataclysmic change are fascinating, and I'm just looking at some of these things now, saying we're seeing the skirmishes in something that not only can be huge. I mean, it's interesting that they hacked the New York Times. It's like, okay, they can hack a website. They did so for political reasons. Interesting. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, because ostensibly of a mistake, all internet traffic was routed through China for 17 minutes. Everything. You know what they were doing. This wasn't a mistake. This was a proof of concept that said, if we ever get to a point where we want to take over the internet, what would we do? And they tested it and said, guess what? We can route all traffic through China. And this system that originally was designed to solve survive a nuclear war so traffic could find its way around anywhere, they said we can make it all go through our place. And then once they're able to do that, think about the global implications of that. So I look at this stuff and say, there is this dark side that is an ongoing battle between the good guys and the bad guys, and the bad guys are generally motivated by personal gain that lets them do real interesting things, and then you get these nation states doing it. We've got a real fragile architecture out there, and in my dark moments I wonder if we're going to have one of these what Talib would call black swan moments, where something so totally unexpected occurs that radically changes the way we're going to do things going forward.
Right. So do you have any, while we're on the gloom and doom, do you have any like two, don't do more than two practical bits of advice for people that might be a little less paranoid than you,
Yeah, I
that
think
maybe should be a
practical.
little more paranoid?
Yeah, practical advice number one is sound password strategy. That's just, when you look at things. What was it? I was reading one of the stories about this, talked about how for a number of years our nuclear arsenal, the password into the system was 00000.
Jesus.
Yeah. Scary thought,
Yeah.
that one. You can get into the nuclear arsenal with the default password. Don't use the same password everywhere. And it used to be the worst thing you did was write your password down because you were afraid somebody would come by your desk and steal your passwords.
Right.
That's probably now the safest thing to do, because the place your password's going to get stolen that's really going to hurt you is not from your desk. It's going to be over the network. And LinkedIn was the first one that brought that to my attention. My password got stolen, and the password I used on LinkedIn was probably one I used, no exaggeration, on 50 or more sites. And I realized, the problem I've got, once it's stolen one place, it's stolen lots of places. And I actually use a password tool. There are a number of them out there. I use one called Dashlane that will store your password so you can use really original ones without having to memorize them. And oh, by the way, you hope Dashlane doesn't get hacked, and that they use the appropriate encryption techniques so that the stuff
Dashlane.
Dashlane. Yep.
DASHLANE.com.
That's correct. And
So
there are just a number of.
So describe that. That's a tool on the laptop.
Yeah, it's
A plugin? Is it a plugin
it's
to
a
Chrome?
plugin in the browser that will. It does a really good job of looking for things like passwords, address fields, credit card fields, and you can store all of your passwords and and financial information in their vault, and then it will fill it in on the website.
Mm-hmm.
But however you do it, get off the default passwords. Stop trying to come up with passwords that you remember. And it's either use one of these tools and have really good password behavior, or get accustomed to the process that says, click, I don't remember my password, reset my password, and get in there. Because the fragility of that information, it is fragile. You will have a password stolen from somewhere. And the only way to handle that is to bound the damage. And the way you bound the damage is not using the same password everywhere. And I'm one who was guilty of that. For years, I used the same password everywhere. Then I went to a two-tiered factor where, if you had interesting financial information, I used one password, and the one where it's like I needed to register with a password, but this is the only time I was ever going to use it, I used my second password. Now I don't have the same password anywhere, and with these tools, they either automatically log me in, or at the very least I can look up my password easily without having to reset it, or what the heck, I go reset it.
Interesting. And what's Dashlane's revenue model?
It's the classic freemium, so there's a set of services you can get for free, which are most of the things I want, but there are premium services that you can look at in terms of monitoring situations and so on, so that you can pay them for that. There are some other interesting models that are emerging out there. I don't remember the name of the website right now, but there's one I saw them present at a meetup in the city probably 6-9 months ago, where what they do is, how many times do you go in and take advantage of a, click this now, you can get it for free, cancel in 30 days,
right?
And if you don't, we'll bill your credit card. You forget, and your credit card gets billed, and it takes you 6 months, and then you got to go hassle with it. Well, what these guys do is monitor your credit card bills. You give them your password so they can access the account, but they basically monitor your transactions and say, hey, you had a transaction at one of those places that normally people want to cancel that service.
Mm-hmm.
So it alerts you to all sorts of transactions that aren't fraudulent, but things you probably meant not to pay. And their business model initially was they'd do a couple of things for free. Maybe they'd monitor one credit card at account, but if you wanted all of them, you had to pay them, and that model still exists. But they're also going around to the banks, basically saying, "Isn't this a service you want to offer to your customers?" So, kind of the OEM
I
model
like it.
of
Yeah.
software is evolving in interesting ways, where we'll have people that